So I've got an interesting question here to answer that comes from you guys. You can send in your questions to askpvquestions@gmail.com. This man said, I know you consider David among the top progressive commentators, but about what percentage of his commentary would you say you agree with? It seems to me he toes the MSNBC line a lot on a lot of things, and if I said I agreed with about 40% of what he says, even that might be generous. Personally, I think Tom Hartman is much more credible and maybe the best when it comes to progressive issues, even though he occasionally gives people like Tom Perez a platform. So the Tom Hartman thing is sort of a separate thing. I'll just touch on that a little bit. I think Tom Hartman is great. He's very clearly a very well-educated man, just very smart guy overall. And, not only do you get that from the, substance that he gives out, but just his delivery is really fucking good. So Tom Hartman is great. But I want to focus on David Pacman in this. Now, I've talked about how my top two progressive commentators, number one is Secular Talk, and then number two is David Pacman. I really enjoy both of their shows. I think they give different styles, especially with David having a co-host. I think that differentiates himself from other solo progressive news outlets, at least somewhat, and I think it keeps it interesting. And I think his delivery is also a bit different. His argumentation from time to time, a good amount of times is different. What percentage of things would I say I agree with David on? I don't know what would be an exact percentage, but I mean, I'm gonna border on like 90-95 because the only things that I hear, the only things I really have a problem with, he really disparages Jill Stein for some odd reason. I'm not sure why he has a hate boner for Jill Stein. It doesn't make sense to me personally. But besides that, he seems to be a really either baby steps or not really into primarying corporate Democrats. Now, he says he is, but when he's questioned about the Justice Democrats, he sort of shows that he doesn't really know too much about the Justice Democrats, and he sort of questions whether or not in certain districts we should go for progressives or try to get a Democrat in office. And I think that the core of the problem is not having real progressives running for candidacies and then getting into office. All right, so I'm not really a fan of that. But I don't know if there's really concrete issues I disagree with. I think that his position on Israel, is pretty, I don't really have that because he's pro two-state solution. I just think that he may be a bit less of a more, fierce guy on that, if that makes any sense. I hope it does. I hope it makes some sense. But, those are probably the main things that I can think of. Remember, during the 2016 primary, he was fervently and, just fervishly, proponent of Bernie Sanders. He was, supporting Bernie Sanders all the way. He would have, he had an economist on multiple times from, I think, his alma mater, who talked about how Bernie's policies can work economically, which is something that nobody else did. Nobody else in the progressive community did that. So, I don't know. I think a lot of people question his progressive credentials and say that he's not left-wing enough. And of course, there's the whole Russia issue. Now, that toes the line sometimes for me. I personally am somebody who thinks that let's let the investigation pour through. I do think that it's pretty clear that collusion has happened. Whether or not it changed any of the votes, or I think is just complete bunk. I don't think it changed any of the votes. I don't know if David does either. But did it influence the outcome of the election? I'm not sure. We'd have to look into that. But I do want the investigation to play through. But again, it is pretty clear that the collusion has happened with the Donald Trump Jr. meeting in the Trump Tower, which we all know about. And I'll be touching more on that in another story as well, actually. But there's sometimes he'll sort of toe the line where I'm like, okay, maybe going a little bit too far. But the main issue I have, and not necessarily that this applies to David, but this definitely applies to people who are, talking about Russia a lot. I don't think that should be anybody's main issue for two reasons. One of them is that it's not the most important issue. Number two, electorally, that's a shitty idea because really the people who voted for Donald Trump couldn't give two fucks whether or not Putin really has anything in this or that Russia helped him. They don't care. So not only is it just, it's not the most important issue, you know, merit-wise. It's just not, right? No, like nobody cares. But, I mean, that's obviously an understatement. Of course people care. But the point here being is that if you ask people about questions, they're going to tell you, you know, hey man, like I'm trying to pay my bills. I'm trying to, you know, make it, healthcare costs are really high. You know, a lot of people don't even have coverage. Those are going to be the most important issues that are really affecting them. When you go polling data, and there's polling data out on that already, but you know, it's just, it's not a good electoral strategy either. It's not going to win you any voters over. But that's my, you know, side of the Pacman. I think it's probably 90-95% agreement.